All right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. I have a recurring guest. I'll have frequently recurring guests on my other show, which I don't do anymore. But Lierre Keith. Lierre Keith is a co-founder of the Deep Green Resistance organization and a co-author of many books, several books. But tonight we're going to talk about the vegetarian myth, the book she wrote concerning a very appropriately named book, titled book. Tells you directly exactly what it's going to be talking about. So let's get this started here, Lierre. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
And
Thanks for
yeah,
having me again. It's always fun
always,
talking to you.
always, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, it was a long, long story because I was at 16 years old, I became a vegan, and then I spent about 20 years doing that. And
Oh,
I was
wow.
all in. That was my world. That was my people. That was how I was going to save the planet and save the animals and save my health and feed all the hungry children and all those things that you're promised when you take this out. And at the time, it all made sense because honestly, I didn't have any better information. So I was in. I was all in. And the thing about being a vegan for most of us, I think, is that it's not just what you eat. You know, it becomes who you are.
Right.
So
Oh,
it's
sure.
it
It's
becomes
a
this identity. It's
right.
really primary to your sense of self. And this
Right.
makes it really hard when the diet starts to fail. You it's this terrible struggle of cognitive dissonance because the diet cannot be wrong, and yet here I am falling apart year by year. Eventually, for me, it collapsed. I did really tremendous damage, some of it permanent, to my body, and I had to face that I'd been wrong the whole time. So then there's like a year and a half where you're just in the rubble. You just have no idea where do I live? What is my place in the cosmos? What is the meaning of the universe? How can this not have worked? So there's this real struggle, and that was a hard year or two when you come sort of crawling out of it, and you're also likely to lose a lot of your friends, and that doesn't make it any easier. So then there was this mighty struggle for me to try to figure out, well, what of this was correct and what wasn't, because that whole time that I did it, I was never able to look at anything critically. I couldn't, it was too primary to my sense of self, and that it's a very cult-like mentality.
I
It's
was
not an
just
out
going
and
to
out
say that. Thank you for saying that because I was like, it sounds like a cult.
Yeah, and it's not an out and out cult, but I think for some people it really feels that way because they honest to God lose their friends when they walk away from this. And if that's your whole world, it is really hard. So one thing that I say to people when they reach out to me is, you can make other friends. I know it's hard, but you can. You can't make another body. And if you keep doing this level of damage, it's going to be permanent. So you just have to accept it. And your friends will eventually follow you because it will collapse on them too. It does not work with the human template. But anyway, I didn't know any of that. So then there was a sort of long period of trying to put everything back together. Like, well, what do I think about the environmental impacts of all of this? Was I right to be eating this way or not? Like, was the whole thing a lie? And where did all this come from? Like, why did people think this was going to work? And then all the nutritional information. It's like, why did all these things go wrong for me? And as it turns out, for most people who try this diet, we all end up with a similar, constellation of problems. Politically, what is it? Is this a way to feed the hungry masses of the world?
Right.
And then just this sort of general sense of, does something have to die to feed me? Why do plants not count? How much is actually dying for this diet? Because I wanted it to be death free and cruelty free and the good thing for animals. And it just turns out that none of that is true.
Right.
So it took me a long time to put all this together. And then, of course, you start getting into discussions with other people who often are struggling with this as well. And I realized that, like, over a 2-hour period, if we sat and had a conversation, I could convey most of this to them, like everything that I had sort of figured out and put together. But it took a long time. And I also got really bored of having that conversation. So I finally thought, I think if I just put it in a book, I can just hand people the book and then I won't have to keep having this conversation. So
Right.
that's what I did. And I am still willing to have that conversation with anyone who is struggling with this, anyone who is confused, if they're lost, if they're in physical pain, if they are scared. Like, my inbox is always open and I regularly hear from people who, it's the same thing. Their lives are falling apart from this and they don't know what to do. So I'm always there. It's one of the things that it's just my job now. It's what I have to do. It's what, my calling. But I do like having a book, and I'm not the only one now. There's lots of good books about this subject now that you could read any of them and get pretty much the same information. But yeah, it was a long, hard thing putting all this back together. And now I feel like the world for me was made whole again, but it didn't come easy, and it was really one of the hardest things I've ever been through, honestly. So that's why.
Okay, yeah, no, that's definitely a list of good reasons. So like, was there a specific like morning you woke up, you're like, okay, I'm done, no more of veganism, this is crazy, or did you kind of like wean yourself off, or wean it?
No, it was rough. So one of the things that went wrong for me pretty quickly on in the diet was, as it turned out, my spine is degenerating from I have a chronic degenerative condition now, and I have degenerative disc disease. So it's 4 levels of my spine, and it's a grade 4 derangement. So it is as bad as it gets. And the thing about
being a vegan?
Yeah, absolutely. About 2 years in, I started when I was 16. By the time I was 18, I was having this like horrible constant pain in my lower back, and nobody could figure out what was wrong. And you'd have to remember, this was the 1980s. They didn't have MRIs yet. So there wasn't actually a diagnostic way for a doctor to figure this out. They took x-rays, but that looks fine. The x-rays don't show you your disc. So that's the problem. So eventually in 1994, I finally got an MRI, and then it was really apparent what had gone wrong, but that it took a long time. So anyway, 2 years in, I started to get this horrible pain, and it's life-altering pain. I mean, it was, I had to drop out of college. Like, it was horrible. So I'm dealing with all of that emotionally. Like, well, why in the world is there something wrong with me? I'm in the doctor's what I'll say, you're way too young. Like, you can't really have something wrong with you.
So you weren't able to put that together. You weren't able to put the doctor, like nobody even like on the periphery of your life reconciled, like, well, maybe it's your diet. Nothing.
Nobody said that. Nobody. Not a single doctor said it. Nobody said it.
Right.
Now I think there would be enough people sort of in the periphery who would have heard like this diet actually doesn't work. But at the time it was like, I don't know, it just seems like this mysterious pain that's wrecking me. And so, I mean, that just went on and on for years. So then finally, it was 1999, and I mean, at that point I had so much that was wrong with me, but overwhelmingly it was like this tremendous sense of just complete exhaustion. I just couldn't move. I was so tired all the time. I was like, I wasn't just a corpse, I was like dragging a corpse as well as being a corpse. Like, it's that level of exhaustion. So I took a Qigong class. It's like a form of Chinese medicine, like just because Western medicine couldn't help me. So it was like, well, let me try this other stuff. And I had acupuncture. I'd gotten a little bit of relief from acupuncture, but I mean, that hadn't helped me with my spine at all. But with some of the other things that had gone around, the sun is shining in my eyes now. It's a bad time of day for this. Okay, so anyway, that's all right. The Qigong healer that I went to see, he also did like private consultations. So I thought, well, I should just go talk to him and see what he can do for me. He was very, very kind. He was from China originally. He immigrated to the United States, but he'd been doing Qigong since he was a child. So he was like a master. He's one of those people that achieved just incredible amounts of just wisdom in this tradition. And he was great, and he was really helping people in the class. So I was like, well, I'll go see what he thinks. But he was the one that just so in Chinese medicine, their main diagnostic tool, or one of them, is they take your pulses, right? I don't know if you've ever been to an acupuncturist, but so they can feel the different energy meridians in your body, and what's strong and what's weak, and they have different ways of sort of describing the different things that can go wrong. Anyway, he goes to take my pulses, and he just looks at me in astonishment. He's like, "There's nothing here." Like, I know, I'm really tired. He's like, "No, there's nothing." And I'm like, oh, am I dead? He's like, basically, like, don't joke. This is like, you're done. Like, you can't keep doing this. Wow. Whatever it is, you have to stop. And then he's like, what do you eat? Are you on some kind of basically weirdo diet? Like, well, I'm a vegan. He's like, no, you can't do this. Just point blank, you cannot do this. And it was really hard. So I just started crying. And the thing is, like, the lead up to this, I kind of knew that's where this was going to end.
Yeah.
And because at that point, half of my friends had already been through it, like including my sister. All of us had been vegans, on and off. all the way. I was the one that was most hardcore. So of course I was the one that ended up more damaged. A lot of my friends were like vegetarians trying to be vegan and like just couldn't do it for more than 2 or 3 days. And then were like, eat an egg or eat some butter, like God, I had some cheese. But everybody tried really hard because we thought it was the right thing. So I'd already seen a number of people go through this where they have to do this confession, like, oh, I'm eating fish now. And then like my sister more than once sat me down and was like, you just have to stop. Like, you would feel so much better if you ate a piece of fish. I know you don't want to hear this, but it has helped me dramatically to eat some fish once in a while. I'm like, no, I can't. It's wrong. There's no way this is true. It can't be true, because then the whole thing collapses. It has to be the best way. So I had sort of seen other people go through it. So I kind of like I knew it was coming, that he was going to say this and I was going to be faced with this terrible, but I was so desperate. I mean, I can't even describe how bad I felt. So anyway, he's like, it has to stop. And I was like, yeah, but I'm a vegan. And he's like, well, do you have a religious belief? Like, why does this matter so much? And I just started crying, It's like, I don't want to hurt any of the animals. And he's like, look, the big fish eat the little fish.
Yeah, I mean it's a natural cycle. It kind
I'm
of has
not
to
a
be.
fish. I was like, but I'm human.
Right,
I
right.
get to make a moral decision. Why can't I make this? Why can't this be one of my moral decisions? Why am I stuck having to do this? Like, it doesn't seem right. Why am I given the capacity to decide I don't want to kill animals, and then it doesn't matter, I still have to do it? Like, that's where the universe, like the cosmos, just collapses on you. I didn't know what to think of it. And he's like, I'm just telling you, you can't keep going like this. You've done yourself in, and it's too late. I can't help you with your spine. And like, it was at some previous moment, I might have been able to do something for you. This is so far gone. There's nothing that's going to touch this. So I was like, all right, well, at least he's honest. So I left the appointment and I thought, all right, well, I'm going to have to do this now. And this is going to be really hard. But if I try it, if I eat a little bit of meat and I feel better, then at least I'm going to feel better. So that's good. That's a win. If I try it and it doesn't work, then at least I can say to everybody, well, guess what? I tried it and you're all wrong, and I can still be a vegan because that's not my problem. So I figured win-win, but I'm going to have to go through this now. So all I could think to do was get a can of tuna fish, because I wouldn't have to cook it. I wasn't going to cook it. And I really understood those people that have those really deep, like, religious prescriptions against certain dietary things like kosher or halal or whatever. It was like, it was unclean. That's how it felt. Like, bringing meat into my house. Are you crazy? I was like, well, it'll be contained in a can. I can get rid of the can, and I don't have to cook it. I can just eat it with a plastic fork. So it won't touch my dishes, and it won't touch my silverware, and I can still get this done. So that was my thought process. So I did. I bought a can of tuna fish, and I got home, and I remember sitting in that little apartment, just like, all right, step by step, open the can. And I just stared at it like, well, there's the tuna fish. You just got to do it. So I just put that plastic fork in and took that bite, and it was over. It was like night and day. It was, people talk about the meatgasm. Like, it's so intense.
Did you just well, tuna fish is like awesome. Like people actually like have like random cravings just for tuna fish sandwiches.
It was,
so yeah, no,
it was
that's
incredible. I mean, I was like shaking
baby.
all over. It was like a reaching into a wall, like a low level, like a 9-watt battery or something. It was like, oh my God, I could feel it all the way down my throat, all the way to my stomach, and then rippling through my body. I had to lie down. It was that intense. And then, of course, I just cried. Like, all right, well, everything's over. I don't know what any of it means anymore. I thought this was the way, and it's clearly not, because this guy's right, and I've wrecked myself. So what now? So then it just becomes, that process of putting it all back together and trying to learn what was true in all of this, and what, in fact, did we get so terribly wrong. And it turns out that most of it is wrong. I will say, and I always try to open this to other vegans and people who, are still kind of in that world, that the ethical framework, the morals that, you are trying to live by, those are the correct ethics. So anything that questions human hubris, human entitlement, the destruction of the planet, that all of that is correct. You want a better world, and I understand that. I do too. I never stopped wanting those things. So I'm still the same person, and I'm still driven by the same, sort of ethical framework. It's just I have better information, and with better information, different information, you too might make a very different decision about this. So that's not the issue. The issue isn't, oh, well, humans get to do whatever they want. That's not where I came down on this at all. It was still, how do we make the best world that we can make for everyone who's here, the plants, the animals, the rivers, everybody, the forests, and the humans. Like, how do we do this? And I had really, I had believed it about veganism, but it, none of it, like I said, none of it turned out to be true. I grew up in this really kind of urban, suburban area. I didn't even know what like a broccoli plant looked like. I had no idea where my food came from. So I was very vulnerable to these other ideas about, oh, just eat agricultural food and you'll be fine. Rice and corn and wheat are the foods of peace and justice and animal kindness to animals, and better for the humans and better for the global warming. And like, it's just, I can walk you through this now. None of that's true, but I believed it because I didn't know better, and I certainly didn't live on a farm. I had no idea what the price of my food was. So the only thing you're left with for the sort of coastal urban people is you've got your plate, and you look down at your plate and you think, oh, is there something dead on my plate? And when you see a dead animal, you're like, oh, I'm not going to eat that. It's a dead animal. No way. And everything else doesn't count as a dead thing, so you eat it. And that's not the question. The question is what died to get that food on your plate. And if you're eating agricultural foods, you're killing the entire world. That's where the problem begins.
Yes.
It's literally, agriculture is the problem. And I didn't know that when I was a vegan. Nobody walked me through that. I didn't understand it. So I thought that, as long as there wasn't a dead animal, it had to be food that was peaceful and lovely and sustainable and bountiful and, good for everybody. And I was wrong. So tell me what you want me to get into next, because we can do the agriculture part, or
let's do agriculture, because I have background in that as well. I have a certification in horticulture, which, I mean, it was about growing plants. I get that, but they definitely emphasize they emphasize permaculture a lot. There's a very specific way of doing things that is better for the environment than I'll just say this: the current style and methods by which we grow food nowadays is absolutely disastrous in a multitude of different ways, not just as far as it contributes to climate change, but as far as like soil erosion and like shore erosion and just land problems and the destruction of ecosystems that you just because you can't see it, they don't care. That the bajillions of microbes in the soil that do all the work are being just utterly destroyed, and that's not a good thing at all. Anyway, so go ahead.
So you have to understand what agriculture is, and in very brute terms, you take a piece of land and then you clear every living thing off it, and then you plant just for humans. So you end up with a monocrop of whatever grain you want to grow. So wheat or corn or soy or rice, it doesn't matter. All the plants and animals that once got to live there and called that place home are gone. They're extirpated into extinction, right? So like a healthy grassland, a prairie, 1 square meter should have 25 different plants. That's just in 1 meter, different species of plants. That's like how dense the life should be there. And you've reduced all of that to corn. I've driven across the country twice, and I can tell you, you start and it just goes. And it's just, depending on where you're the northern or the southern route, it's either all wheat or all corn. It's just hundreds and hundreds of miles on and on and on, a vast landmass. And what should be there instead is all those plants and 60 million bison that are gone. There should be wolves, there should be grizzly bears, there should be everybody, and they're all gone. And it's because we wanted to grow wheat and corn, and we got that instead. And that's what agriculture is. So problem number 1 is the mass extinction. Problem number 2 is that every time you do this activity, you have to clear the soil. And when the soil is bared, it's destroyed. It's just like us. When it's exposed, it dies. I think one of my dogs wants to go outside. You going out, Jamie? Come on. You going to go down the driveway? Go ahead. Sorry. My giant dog was making trouble. Go ahead. Go. All right. So, yeah, soil. And soil is the basis of land life. Okay. We owe our entire existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. And we destroyed it all by doing this process. So you have to understand the difference between annuals and perennials. So perennials are most plants. Over 90% of plants are all perennials. And what that means is they live a long time. So like where I live in the redwood forest, the trees live 2,000 years. Some of these trees are older than Christianity. Like that's how ancient they are. There are trees that live even longer. Grasses, same thing, long-lived perennial grasses. They can just go on and on forever. And because they live a long time, they have many, many reproductive strategies. They don't just have one. So they can spread by root, or like in the redwoods, when the old redwoods fall, They do make seeds, but that's not their main strategy. The old trees fall, and then we have what are the burls that grow on the. There's these like strange little bulges that grow on the trunks. Those are, it's a totally different kind of cells in those, and they make really beautiful patterns. So a lot of times people cut them off and then make like, I don't know, furniture and special guitars and whatever out of them. But you shouldn't do that because that's where the new redwoods come from. So the moment that the tree is horizontal and puts down roots that way, then that becomes the new tree. It will sprout from there, and then the new tree grows. So this is how redwoods, that's their best reproductive strategy. The thing about annuals is that they don't live very long. They're called annuals because they don't even live a year. So they don't have time to make deep roots, and they really only have one reproductive strategy, and that's seeds. And they have to get on it really fast because the clock is ticking, okay? And the entire species depends on them making those seeds. So they got to get fertilized, and they got to get fat, and then they have to dry, and then they have to fall or get carried. And so in nature, like I said, over 90% of the plants are perennials. And one of the most important jobs is keeping the soil covered. So there's always going to be like in the forest, there's duff. So you'll have like all the forest, like, well, in the redwoods, it'll be the needles, but in like deciduous forest, it's going to be the leaves. So they make this beautiful kind of soft, squishy stuff. I mean, you've all walked in a forest, or if you're a woodland, you know what I'm talking about. And it's shaded, so you're not going to have a lot of grasses. But what you have instead is that nice squishy duff. But that means that the soil is covered, because what's underneath those trees, would be bare ground. And this is why you should never rake your leaves. Like, please leave them there.
Right.
The soil needs it. So
Right.
all that microbial activity, that's what makes soil be alive. And
Yeah.
1 tablespoon of soil can contain, get ready, over 1 billion living creatures.
Yeah.
1 billion. And that's what we're killing when we do agriculture. So the annuals have a place in nature, and they're nature's first responders. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a disaster, and nature is prepared. So a fire, a flood, a landslide, a volcano, for some reason, every once in a while, the land will be bare. There'll be bare soil. And that's the moment that the annuals spring to life. Those seeds have been waiting in that soil, sometimes for hundreds of years. And now they have no competition from the perennial plants. There's enough sunlight. There's no roots in the way. They cannot compete against those perennial roots. It's a very, very dense mat that perennials make, but it's all gone. It all got destroyed in whatever disaster. And now the annuals spring to life. And so they do. And so I say it's like when you cut yourself and then you need a Band-Aid or even maybe stitches. So that's the emergency, right? And so you clamp it back together somehow, put a bandage on it. Those are the annuals. They're holding it together to keep that emergency from getting worse.
Yeah.
But eventually your skin knits back together, and that's the perennials closing back in. So even for a few years, you might have way more annuals in that spot. But eventually the perennial grasses or the forest or whatever you live in, those will come back and seal up over that. And then whatever annuals were able to produce seeds, they'll lie dormant for 100 or 1,000 years until it's time again to spring to life for the emergency. So the problem with humans is that every once in a while, across the planet, there are places, and it's entirely in river basins because rivers are constantly flooding, right? So you have there's so much disturbance naturally in river valleys that there are a lot more annual plants there. You're going to find a lot more annual grasses in where rivers are. And that's why agriculture always starts in places that are rivers. So you have like famously the Tigris Euphrates, the Ganges, you go around the world, it's always in a big river valley. And that's because there's way more annual plants there. And a few of them actually make seeds that are big enough that it's worth the human effort to harvest them. Like, you actually get more calories out than you get from, you not expect, like, a lot of seeds are so small, it's not worth the effort. You're going to expend way more calories getting the seeds and processing them. But there's a few that it's actually worth the effort, perhaps, to eat them. So that's why agriculture always starts in those river valleys. But it's an inherently destructive process, because to get those annuals to grow where we want them to grow, you have to create that emergency over and over again. You have to clear that land. And that's why we invented things like tractors and moldboard plows and all of this. It has to be cleared, because the annuals, you all know this is true, right? If you look outside your window, I'm going to assume you're looking at a few trees or a little bit of a lawn. You've got some grass. If you want to grow lettuce or tomatoes or even wheat or corn, what you have to do You're going to have to chop down that tree to get sunshine. You're going to have to dig up that grass to bear the soil. You're going to have to probably clear out a lot of weeds because there's going to be a tremendous number of seeds in that soil waiting to protect the soil from the emergency that you have just created. Eventually, you'll have really bare soil ready to go, and you can put in whatever it was that you wanted to grow there. But you had to dig up the grassland. You had to pull down the forest. That's what you had to do. And that's what humans have done across the planet. Every single place that agriculture could be done, we've done it. There's no more land to take. We've conquered every continent with this process. And so the other problem with it is that because you're not sharing that land with other beings, it means that temporarily you get a bumper crop of humans. And this is the real problem. Agriculture is always based on two things: drawdown and overshoot. And the drawdown is that you're destroying the soil and all the other plants and animals. So the entire biotic community is being drawn down. Oh, plus the water table and the local rivers and all the rest of it. You're destroying everything in the wake of this. You're turning the land into desert. But while you're doing it, you temporarily have this bumper crop of humans because you're not sharing that land. So like in a usual, like a temperate rainforest, like where I live, it would take about a square mile to support one human. But if you do agriculture, you can do it just on an acre or two because you're not sharing that land with anybody. It's all just for humans. So this is the problem. Now you've got way too many people. Well, now what are you going to do? Because every year you've got less and less soil, less and less water, less and less of the wild around you to try to harvest other things to eat from, because you have to keep taking more land because you're destroying your soil. And this is why agricultural societies always end up militarized, is because you have to go out and conquer your neighbors. You've used up your own stuff. Now you got to go out and get more. And that's the pattern all around the world. You have this bloated power center surrounded by conquered colonies, and then that city takes what it wants. And what it wants is food and water and energy and, oh yeah, slaves, because agriculture is also backbreaking labor. And for anyone to have any kind of leisure, they need slaves. And this is why by the year 1800, literally 3/4 of the people alive on this planet, 3/4, were living in some form of serfdom, indenture, or out and out slavery.
Wow.
It's been a nightmare, agriculture. It's destroyed the planet. We can talk about how it's destroyed our health. So all those plants and animals have had nowhere to go. And it's destroyed our human societies. It's destroyed our capacity to live in the, egalitarian band societies that we evolved in, which were generally pretty nice places. And all of that got wrecked. And now we have militarism, and we have racism, and we have patriarchy, and we are, destroying the only planet that we've got. It's all just going down. So this is where it started. And the only question left is why? And nobody really knows. Why did humans start doing this? It doesn't actually make any sense. We traded in a good life of leisure. I mean, hunter-gatherers have a lot of leisure time. And some of the activities that they talk about loving the most are taking naps and gossiping. Like, that's what they do. And of course, they make music and do rituals and like all that fun stuff too. But it's a pretty easy life when all you have to do is just step outside and catch a fish. Like, it couldn't be easier. Just go down to the beach and grab some crab. Like, life was like that here in the Pacific Northwest. All the streams around my house would have been filled with salmon.
Right.
I could have just taken anything I wanted. It would have taken me 10 minutes every day to provide for my food. It would have been nothing. And it's all gone. All the salmon are gone because of the dams, because we think we need electricity and agriculture. So, we killed the world. But anyway, we don't really know why people did it. The story that we get told is that, everybody was starving and they were hungry and cold and it was awful. And there was no security ever. And then we figured out we could grow food, and then we had a surplus and it was wonderful and everything got better. And nothing could be further from the truth. The archaeological record is so clear that the bones of hunter-gatherers are always long and strong and dense and disease-free, and they have perfect dentition and no cavities, and they're beautiful. And you can tell in 5 seconds whether the bone came from a hunter or from a farmer, because the farmer's bones are falling to pieces. They're riddled with diseases, they're small, they're brittle. The first thing that happens when people take up agriculture is they shrink 6 inches and their teeth fall out. So this is around the world, every single place this has ever been tested. It's the same pattern. Anywhere people took up agriculture, you've got the beautiful people, you've got agriculture comes in, usually by conquer. It spreads by genocide. And then, then you see the generations that follow where everything just falls apart. And some of the clearest examples of what we call them the diseases of civilization, because they're the diseases that come with agricultural foods. But one of the clearest examples of this is the spread of wheat across Europe. So you have, ultimately from the Levant, you have the beef wheat people spreading across, and they get into Europe, and then they conquer all of Europe. And it only takes a few hundred years for them to just completely destroy, the hunters of Europe, the people who made the beautiful cave paintings, Lascaux, and all that, this amazing art that they left behind. All of that gets wiped out in like 200, 300 years. And behind in the archaeological record, as wheat spreads across Europe, rheumatoid arthritis is right behind. You don't see it before. They don't have these autoimmune diseases of joints. And then boom, agriculture comes, and there you got it. For the first time, you have rheumatoid arthritis. So, and that's very specifically because the gluten, the protein in gluten looks very, very much like the protein in our joints. And the moment that you have gut dysbiosis and a leaky gut, which is what all of this carbohydrate food will do to you, then all those proteins will then leak into your bloodstream, and now your immune system doesn't know anymore who is me and who is not me. This looks like a strange protein. I'm not really sure. Why is it in my bloodstream? I better attack it. Oh, looks just the same in my joints. I better attack it. I don't think it's me. Now you have rheumatoid arthritis, and it's wheat. That's where it started. So that's agriculture. It's been a nightmare. And I thought I was doing the right thing by eating nothing but grains and beans. I didn't know this. I didn't know I was destroying rivers. I didn't know I was destroying topsoil. I didn't know I was causing mass extinction. Nobody told me that any of this was happening. It's not just one animal. It's entire species are being driven away forever. Dark night of extinction, gone. We're taking all the land. And it's a war. It's a war against the living world. If you stop doing agriculture very quickly, the world comes back. All those plants and all of them, the trees, the grasses, everybody, the animals come home. It doesn't even take that long. But we have to stop fighting that war. And this is the first war. This is the original war.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's very informative. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess just sort of like with your basically moral intuition and understanding, like even vaguely, like how like slaughterhouses and stuff like that. The vegan thing is a very easy go-to. If you have moral considerations about animals, for sure. I mean, our current agricultural practice, as far as like getting meat and stuff like that, are absolutely horrific.
Horrible, and we can all agree to this, and we should all be working together. Factory farming is a nightmare on every level, and we should all be doing our best. And I will say that I thought at the time that somehow my personal purity was going to somehow fix it, and it doesn't. You need to get politically involved. Like, it really doesn't matter all that much what you decide to do in your personal life, which was a hard pill for me to swallow, but it doesn't. It's like a nano amount of just tiny homeopathic level of effect on these political structures. You have to get involved if you want something to change, and there's a million ways to do that, but just you deciding to make different consumer choices is not going to do this. It's not going to bring any of this down. So that's we get told that too, and I think it's really a terrible way that we've sort of handicapped our own movements. We've really just cut ourselves off from effective activism. And that really started at some point in the 90s. I mean, you're old enough that you probably remember this too, but there were those books like, 100 Simple Things You Can Do to Save the Planet. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't think this is really true. I don't think there's 100. So I think there's a bunch of really big things we're going to have to do. But, swapping out one consumer product for another, I just can't see it. Not really.
Well, in order to solve a massive problem, the solution has to happen on a massive scale. I mean, it's just it's a matter of like proportion, and power, the proportion of force, and efficacy, just causal efficacy. I mean, you're not going to, like you said, like one person, changes their diet, that's going to do like nothing.
Nothing.
Just quantitatively, you're not going to have an effect. There's over 7 billion people on the planet. What are you going to?
There's no personal solutions to political problems, and this is very much a political problem. And we need the political will to do something about it, but it means we need to understand it. We need to have the correct analysis. And one of my real sorrows at this point is that some of the people who care the most about the planet are living in complete ignorance about the nature of that problem. It's like, we need to save the planet, but they don't understand what's destroying it, because what's destroying it is agriculture. That's what all of this goes back to. And they don't know that. And they're being told instead, eat, wheat and whatever, grains and beans. I'm like, that's exactly the food that created this problem to start with. And there's no way around it. We have to give up agriculture. We have to let the wild come back. And that's that's what we got. That's what we have to do. We're just gonna have to do it. So anyway, yeah.
And I want to move on to, you talked about rheumatoid arthritis, but I want to talk more about like maybe the digestive aspects or the metabolic aspects of eating grains and stuff like that, diabetes and so on. But real quick, I just want to say, as far as concerns the, what all I had to die to get to this food on my plate, like you said it before, which is a very good way of saying it. I think about like also like in the gardens where like, when you start plowing gardens or tilling soil or whatever, you're killing, groundhogs and besides the microbes, groundhogs and field mice and probably squirrels and birds that put their nests in the soil. Some do that. You're getting away scot free because you're eating plants and not animals like explicitly. You're doing a lot of damage besides just to the soil, the microbes. And the ecosystems, the microscopic ecosystems, but like you're killing just animals that you're trying to avoid killing just from your moral impetus, and you're failing utterly at it. So
yeah, it's one of those things that I mean, nobody told me this, and I didn't know because I didn't live in farm country, so I'd never seen it. But there's like anyone who's ever harvested a field will tell you, and I've heard so many people talk about this now from direct experience, that that last acre is horrible because as you're going through the wheat or the corn, with those big combines, they say it's 1,000 animals per acre is how many die to harvest. Name your grain, but when you get to that final last acre, there'll be like that last little bit that's still standing, and you've done the whole field. And now you're up to the very last little bit, and it's horrible because anything that's left alive has run in there to hide because they're terrified and they've lost their homes now. And it's like snakes. And like you say, ground-dwelling birds and little mammals. So there'll be chipmunks or mice or whoever can live there, and sometimes even baby deer, and they're all just huddled in there because they're terrified. There's this massive machine that has just laid waste to where they lived, and every last one of them gets ground up in that machine. So they said you just don't look behind because there's just nothing but blood behind you. It's just this horrendous, and they hate it. They hate it. Everybody who's ever done that job hates it. So you get to the last one, and it's just like the worst day. You don't want to even, and there you are. Yeah, it's how you get paid. It's how you're feeding your family, but it's horrible. So this is what agriculture is. I just want everybody to understand. You're doing permanent damage to the soil, the mass extinction, because most of the animals that should live there can't live there. But even the ones that can live, there's a very few, but those species that can still survive in those fields, it's the day comes when it's up, and then they are all killed. They are all ground up and spit out the other end. So it's a horrible process.
It's a horrifying image.
It is. It's wretched.
I have a very vivid imagination. That's going to stick with me for a while.
Awful. I know.
Okay.
Some of it is really traumatizing. And I'm sorry. It's not a pleasant thought to have. It's not. We're killing the planet, and this is how.
Yeah. No, it's disgusting.
None of this is happy. It is very grim stuff.
Right.
I always take on like the grim subjects. I don't know. It's my family always jokes that I got the Black Forest gene, so talk to me about it. But I don't know. To me, it's like I have to face it. Like I have to know how bad it is so I can know what to do about it.
Sure.
So it's like factory farming. It's horrible, and it's not going to go away until we face how bad it is, and then we got to figure out what to do about it. But it's the same level of just, this is very bad, and it may give you nightmares, and then you will be very depressed about it. But you can't stay there. You've got to find your warrior spirit and fight for what's left of our world. It's the only planet we have. So anyway. So all right. So you want me to talk about the health parts of this?
Yes.
So we've wrecked the planet, but we've also wrecked our bodies. Right. So there's two basic problems with this kind of plant-based vegan diet, and one is problems of deficiency, and the other is the problems of excess. So there are some things that are utterly lacking in this diet, and there are some things that there are way too much of, or in fact, things we should never even eat that are in the diet. So in terms of the deficiencies, oh gosh, where to begin? Vitamin A, vitamin D, K2 is very hard to come by in plants. And I know people say, oh, vitamin A, but that's in carrots. It's not. The vitamin A the vitamin A that you get in plants is not actually terribly useful to humans. The kind that's available in animal fat is actually the kind that we can use. So you can do the conversion from like the provitamin A, the beta kind, but it's a very, very difficult process for the human body to do because it takes like an 8-to-1 conversion. You have to eat a huge amount of it. The very young and the very old can't do it at all. Like young children really can't do it until they're older. This is one reason why children hate vegetables. Okay, they are of no use to little humans. They can't actually get anything out of them, and they know that, and that's why universally children hate vegetables. Don't make them eat it. There's no point. So they can't use them. They can't utilize them. So that's the vitamin A, the vitamin D, the K2, B12. Obviously, it's a big one, and that's always the problem for vegans. Has to be a way to get B12. There's not. You will damage your hearing. You can go blind from not having B12. Your brain will shrink. That's what all those studies, the famous Oxford study, your brain will shrink 5%. That's 1/20th of your brain you will lose. And a great deal of that is because of the B12. Yeah, it's not a joke. There are literally vegans who have gone blind and damaged their hearing and whatnot from this, from eating this diet. Come on, go outside, dog. Sorry, my dog is barking again. All right, you coming in? So there's that. And then the saturated fat itself is incredibly life-affirming substance for us. We absolutely just have to have the fat. Your brain is almost 80% fat. So if you don't give it any fat, it can't function. I mean, it can't do it. And I want you to think about what is a human being? What is an animal? Well, on one level, what we are is we are a set of electrical impulses in a watery environment. How does that work? Well, it works because your nerves are insulated. So there's that myelin sheath, and myelin is a specific kind of a fatty substance that coats every last one of your nerves so that they actually can fire in your body, which is mostly water. That's how that works. And that's made from cholesterol. All of your nerves are going to fall apart. Never mind, like your brain, which is the one thing we have as humans. It can't function without fat. So if you're not eating any, you're just going to slowly fall to pieces on that level too. Another thing is that the cholesterol is the mother hormone. It's like the base substance for every single hormone in your body, and that includes your sex hormones. So you can't make hormones, and this is one reason why women who are too thin from an eating disorder or from being gymnasts or dancers or serious athletes, there's this whole kind of domino effect that happens, especially if they start really young and don't get to go through the correct sort of pubertal succession. Like the kinds of things that are supposed to happen in your body don't happen on time because you don't have enough fat. And a lot of what we know about that is from studying those gymnasts from the 1970s, because it's really bad. You're supposed to develop at a certain pace, but you can't make your sex hormones if you don't have enough fat in your diet. It just won't happen. And it has to be animal fat because it has to be cholesterol. And so this is why a lot of women who go on this diet stop menstruating and end up with tremendous problems with fertility issues. And I can attest that this is a thing because it happened to me. And pretty much everybody I knew we were all going through the same thing, and nobody could tell us why. And now I understand why. We had no cholesterol. We couldn't make estrogen and progesterone. And men don't make testosterone. So you're not going to get the sex hormones that you need. Your body does this really amazing thing, which is it's able to prioritize. So there's hormones you need just to keep you alive kind of from day to day. So if you're not getting enough cholesterol, your body will just shut off certain processes as a way of sort of saying, well, all right, you're clearly in a famine right now. There's no food and we don't want you to die. So we'll make sure that you have the ones that you need just to keep breathing and whatnot. We'll keep those moving, but you clearly don't have enough to have a baby. So we're just going to shut down all of those. Like, just no sex hormones for you right now. When you get more fat in your diet, we'll talk. Maybe we can start that up again. But until then, you're not getting any of that. So that's what happens. And there's so many women I know have just been heartbroken with kind of fertility issues. And it's like, I can fix this for you. I know what to tell you how to do. You got to take out the seed oils, put in the good quality animal fats, eat a good chunk of protein every day, and I can pretty much guarantee you, take all the soy out. That's important. Give it 6 months or a year of a healing, appropriate human diet, and you shouldn't have any trouble. And right now the infertility, it's really scary to think about the numbers that I've heard from some places. Like 10% of all the babies in Denmark right now are being born through some kind of technological intervention like IVF, because there's just like a public health crisis essentially, and it's because everyone's so infertile. And this is why, is because their traditional diet's been taken over by like the industrial seed oils, and there's no butter anymore.
Wow,
it's
that's wild.
really scary. It's really scary. And then the more you look into stuff like IVF, like the scarier it gets, because that's a whole other discussion. But anyway, so cholesterol itself is this really life-affirming substance that we need. So there's that, and then protein. You got to have protein, and you really can't get it from. And I know they tell you, oh, there's plenty, and you can, mix up your beans and your rice and all this, and it'll be fine. But it's not. The problem with plant proteins is that they come wrapped in cellulose, because that's what plant bodies are, cellulose. And we are not animals that can digest cellulose. There are some creatures on this planet that had evolved to digest cellulose. So all the ruminants, that's what a rumen is. It will digest cellulose, but it does that through a very specific bacterial process. So it has, like a cow or a bison, they have a multi-chambered stomach that has a very deep pH. And the point of that is that they're supporting this immense population of bacteria. And it's actually the bacteria that will digest the cellulose. So it looks like, it's so fascinating, it looks like a cow is eating grass, and that's not what's happening. The cow is actually biting the grass and swallowing the grass, but the grass is actually feeding the bacteria. It's the bacteria that are digesting the grass. And what the cow gets in exchange is the byproducts. So basically the waste products of the bacteria are fatty acids. So it's fat. And then the bodies of the bacteria, as they die, because they die pretty quickly, it's just constant changeover, that's the protein. So the cow looks like she's eating grass. It's just like raw cellulose, but it's not actually what's happening. The cow is actually eating a high-fat, moderate protein diet from the body.
That's really interesting. Yeah,
fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you wonder how the cows get so fat. Go ahead.
That's what they're doing. And there's a whole bunch of other animals. It's the same deal. But so the creatures that ultimately digest the bacteria it's the cellulose, it's the bacteria. But there's animals that live in symbiotic relationships with them. So it looks like they're actually eating that, but they're not. So that's what they're doing. But we can't do that. And so when you eat protein that is like a plant protein wrapped in this cellulose, you can't really access it. So they call it poor quality protein. Everybody but the vegans will call it that for a reason. We don't really utilize it. We can't get to it. We can't get through that cellulose. So most of it just goes out the other end. And we're animals, and we are carnivores, and we have a very, very acid stomach. And that's for breaking down protein. It's not for digesting cellulose. It would be a completely different digestion. So what we need is meat. And I'm sorry that upsets people, but that's what we ate for 2 million years. It's how we got here. So that's our diet. And anyway, so acid stomach, that's what that means, and a pretty short digestive tract as well for that. So we need protein, and that we need a lot of it, because that's what we're made from, and we can't really assemble proteins. It's like we have to eat those amino acids. It's the ones that are called essential, because we just have no way to produce them, so we have to eat them. And there's a number of them that aren't really considered essential, but they should. And one of them is literally called carnitine. And it's not considered essential because you can sort of put it together, but not really. So that's another one, the carnitine. And then there's heme iron. And the red blood cell is a really amazing product of evolution. It is just perfectly designed. The shape of it, and then the way that all the little, the different, the molecules that are in it. There's at the very, very center of it, it's supposed to be one iron molecule that kind of holds it in. It's there at the very center of it. And then as your blood moves around your body, each blood cell carries that iron, and it's the iron that lets it grab oxygen out of your lungs and then release oxygen to the cells. And that's what we burn, is oxygen. That's how we're alive moment to moment, is by burning oxygen. That's where we get our basic metabolic health. That's what we are. So it's iron that makes that oxygen exchange happen. So we grab it out of our lungs and then give it wherever it's needed. And that's what iron does. It sits very beautifully in the center of that molecule, the red blood cell. But the problem is that if you're getting iron from other sources like plants, they're misshapen. You can tell that we evolved to eat this because it doesn't work with plants. The only iron that really fits is heme iron, and it's honestly only available in red meat. So this is how you know that we evolved on the savannas of Africa eating those grass-eating giant ruminants. It's just everything about that food is perfect for the human body. And the more we stray from that, the sicker we get. So the heme iron, you just cannot replace it anywhere. There's no other way to get it in nature except in red meat. So you have to have some. So there's that. And then, there's probably a bunch of stuff I'm forgetting, but that'll do. And then you have the things that the problem with excess. So the very first excess is that when people take up agriculture, what happens is they stop eating a whole bunch of different, like it used to be a diet that was almost, very close to being all animal products or 80% animal products, say. And then the more agriculture takes over, the fewer and fewer animal products they're eating and the more and more carbohydrate they're eating. So it's just a diet of sugar. That's all it is. And if it makes you feel better to call it complex carbohydrate, you can do that, but you need to understand that you are telling yourself a story, because in order for it to get through the brush border in your intestines, everything has to be broken down into the smallest bits. So for complex carbohydrates, that means simple sugar. And that's what it does in your intestines. There's bacteria that break it down into tiny little bits of sugar. So it might look like a piece of whole wheat bread, but by the time you're done digesting it, it's just a quarter cup of sugar. So that's what you're eating. And then you're going to have all the problems that come from that. And one of the big problems is the insulin problem. So you can see again that we were not designed to eat this, because insulin is an emergency response.
Right.
When you eat, whatever it is you eat, if it makes your blood sugar go up, so now sugar has entered the blood, and your body correctly perceives that this is an emergency, because our brains can only survive under a really narrow range of blood sugar. If it's too high or too low, you can fall into a coma and you can die. And anyone who's diabetic can talk to you about that. It's very, very serious. So yeah, okay. You have to be very, very careful. So that's over and over and over again. If you're eating one of these plant-based diets, you're just putting sugar into that system 3, 4, 5 times a day. And every time your blood sugar goes up, the emergency response is triggered. So your pancreas then sends in a surge of insulin. And insulin is a really blunt instrument. It's not refined at all. It will grab everything that it can out of your bloodstream and shove it away for storage, just to clear your blood so you don't die, so that your brain can survive the onslaught of sugar. And it is absolutely an emergency. And the only place that it can really get it out of your blood, put it out of your bloodstream, is into the fat cells. So this is why people who tend to eat these high carb diets is why, well, it's the great experiment they did on the American public. I mean, I was born in 1964 and we did not have an obesity crisis when I was a kid.
Right.
There were always a few people who struggled with their weight, but it wasn't the entire population. And now I just tiny little children that I see every day.
It's like an epidemic. Yeah, no, it's huge.
It's horrible. And it's not anybody's fault. They all did what they were told. The corporate America took over the food stream and just inserted every kind of, low fat, high carb item that they could. And the United States government subsidizes it. Poor people are not stupid. They know that the most calories they can get for their whatever money they've got, whatever food stamps they got, is going to be things like rice and pasta and potato chips. And that will keep them alive from week to week. Long term, it will kill you. But week to week, it's how you're going to get the most calories for your kids is to buy stuff like that. So they're not stupid when they buy that food. It's all they can afford. But we've subsidized all the wrong things, and that's why that's so cheap. It's because of the farm bill here. We're subsidizing this food that is just killing people. So anyway, okay, so your blood sugar goes, so it goes up, insulin comes through.
Yeah, we got 1 minute.
Everything into the fat cells, and then you can't get it out. That's what insulin does. So that's why everybody got fat, essentially, and sick. So all these huge knockdown diseases from there, all the disease and inflammation, blah, blah, blah. So read more about this. You can save your health and your family's health, and also save the planet. There are solutions.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And again, I apologize for having to cut us off prematurely. I had to schedule another interview, which is just be time sensitive.
You can have me on again if you want me to do more, but
absolutely. No, there's more to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. There's a lot more to talk about concerning this very subject, and there's also other things I'd like to talk to you about. But Lierre Keith, the vegetarian myth. Just Google it; you'll find it. It's the first thing that comes up. You just put the vegetarian myth, and it'll come up. read that book. It is a very, very interesting book, very informative. And again, it's like the series you went through when you were a vegan to becoming not a non-vegan is, you know, like just the insights and realizations that you're gonna read about. You're like, oh wow, that does make sense. I never thought about that. From the health and the medical and the agricultural, the environmental, the global, and you're going to talk about this economic implications and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, I gotta go. All right, so thank you, Lierre Keith, for coming on the show. Always a pleasure talking to you. Yes, thank you. I've never been good at doing that, but thank you.
I get the idea.
Okay, so thank you very much. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Let's Talk Lake County. I will talk to you. I've got another show with Jennifer Bannock, the Lake County Coroner. A little dark, but it's interesting stuff here. All right, so Lierre, you take care, and I'll be in touch soon, okay?
Bye.
Bye.